Hello everyone, I've received some requests on my White Weenie deck tech video to do a gameplay of the deck, so that's what I'm gonna be doing today. But first I want to go over all the changes I've made since I've posted the deck tech. I'm only running one Frontline Medic instead of 4. I just feel like there's some better cards in this slot. I'm only running 2 Spear of Heliod instead of 3. That's because I've replaced it with an additional Anthem effect with Path of Bravery, which has been performing really well. I think those are the main changes. I'm not sure how many Banisher Priests were in the original list, but I'm running 2 in the main and 2 in the sideboard. And as mentioned earlier, Path of Bravery is a new addition. And another important change is Mutavault. First I wasn't running any, but I've changed my mind. Mutavault is just too good in this deck, and even though you'll sometimes have trouble casting your Precinct Captain or Boros Reckoner, it's still worth playing it, mainly against the control decks. Mutavault is very good. And in the sideboard, no major changes. I'm running 2 Celestial Flares, mainly for Blood Baron of Viscopa, but it has some other uses as well. So let's go into the match. I'm playing against Esper. The match was previously recorded, so no live commentary, but I'll try to give some insight in my decisions. So I hope you enjoy. Alright, it's game 1 and we are the player on top of the screen, while our opponent on the bottom is on Esper Control. That's blue, black and white. We have a pretty good opening hand with 2 Dryad Militants, Precinct Captain, Imposing Sovereign, and a Spear of Heliod with 2 planes. Our opponent has a pretty land heavy hand, but it does have 2 scry lands to help put unwanted lands on the bottom of his library. And we draw a Soldier of the Pantheon, which we are going to play out in favor of Dryad Militant on turn 1. Just because our opponent might be playing a multicolored spell right away, and that could gain us 1 life, which could end up mattering. This does mean if our opponent plays a Soldier of the Pantheon himself, that we will give him 1 life by playing the Dryad Militant afterwards, but I still think it's worth playing the Soldier first. Instead, our opponent played a second Scryland, and from the looks of it, he's on Esper Control. So instead of running out Precinct Captain, we decide to play 2 1-drops. One of them is the Judge's Familiar, which can try and absorb a removal spell, and this also plays out better if we can eventually play out our Spear, which will bump all our creatures. So we attack with Soldier, putting our opponent on 18, and we have a pretty good board state going on. Of course, we are aware of Supreme Verdict that all the Esper decks play, but that's on turn 4, so we're gonna try and do as much damage as we can as quickly as possible. And our opponent did draw some good cards, but he also drew some more lands, so he didn't have a turn 3 play. Here we drew a Mutavault, which is very good, because not only can it cast our Spear of Heliod, but after the sweeper happens we can keep attacking with the Mutavault. So here our Spear of Heliod gives all our creatures +1/+1, so we will attack for 8 points of damage, and our opponent doesn't have any way to interact. So on turn 4 we see a Supreme Verdict happen, which we kind of saw coming, but luckily we have this Mutavault and we have some pretty good creatures left in our hand. Here we could just attack with Mutavault, but we chose to develop our board before starting to attack because our opponent is still on 10 life. So the most efficient way to play out our creatures was Dryad Militant plus Imposing Sovereign. We could have also played our Boros Elite instead of the Militant, but because our opponent is on Esper we can expect some removal, so the battalion wasn't probably gonna happen. Instead, our opponent just plays a Jace, Architect of Thought, activates his +1 ability, so all our attacking creatures will have -1, -0. And on our turn, we draw a Banisher Priest, which isn't very good in this matchup, but it's still a 2/2 creature. So we just decide to activate our Mutavault and attack Jace with all our creatures, because the problem with letting a Jace sit on the battlefield for a while is not only does it keep giving all your creatures -1, -0, but at any time the Esper player can decide to activate his -2 ability to try and find an answer. And I mean, your Esper opponent won't always have 1 or 2 Supreme Verdicts, so if they can't find it with Jace, then you're in pretty good shape. So we took down a Jace and played a Boros Elite. So our opponent is still on 10 life, so an attack next turn with all our creatures could be lethal, and from the looks of it he doesn't have an answer because he's digging with a divination, but he finds a couple more lands, so we managed to win game 1. Alright, after sideboarding it's time for game 2. We sided out cards like Banisher Priest, which isn't very good in this matchup, in favor of some more resilient threats like another Ajani, and we also sided in some Celestial Flares for Blood Baron of Escopa. Our opening hand was pretty good. We had a turn 1 Dryad Militant, and we have a Daring Skyjek, Mutavault, Path of Bravery, and Boros Elite with a bunch of lands. But this time around our opponent does have some early interaction, as he cast a Azorius Charm, putting our Dryad Militant back on top of our library. But we did play Mutavault plus Daring Skyjek to follow up, which is pretty good. Here we decide to activate Mutavault and attack, which I'm not sure was the right play there. Because if our opponent had a Doomblade and destroyed our Mutavault, that could have been bad for us. But we do have a follow-up Dryad Militant. Here our opponent casts a turn 4 Supreme Verdict, always on time. And here we draw our Mutavault again and play out our Path of Bravery, which is very good in this matchup, as the Esper player isn't applying a lot of pressure, so it's easy to go above 20 life and get the +1/+1 bonus. Remember that you gain the life at the point your creatures are declared as attackers, which means before damage is dealt they could be getting the +1/+1 bonus, but our opponent did have a Hero's Downfall to take care of our Mutavault, but we did have a second one and a Boros Elite to follow up. And our opponent is on 4 untapped lands, which does represent Dissolve, and he will be using it on our Soldier of the Pantheon, and he will also get to scry for 1. And we still get to attack with Mutavault and Boros Elite and gain 2 life to activate Path of Bravery and give all our creatures +1/+1. So our opponent drops down to 10 life, but here he does play a Blood Baron of Escopa, which has protection from white, which is a problem. That's why we sided in Celestial Flares, but we didn't see any yet. And here a Imposing Sovereign is a little late, but we still played out. We don't really have any attacks, so we can tap Mutavault. And an attack from Blood Baron gains our opponent 4 life. He also plays a Soldier or Pantheon and a Jace. The Soldier comes into play tapped because of our Imposing Sovereign, and Jace goes +1 to give all our creatures -1, -0. But here we activate Mutavault and attack with everyone, activating Battalion on Boros Elite to take out Jace and gain us some more life with Path of Bravery. Remember that you only get the +1/+1 if your life total is above 20, which we were at the point that we attacked with 3 creatures. We also had a follow-up Soldier of the Pantheon, which has protection from Blood Baron, but because Blood Baron also has protection from Soldier, none of them can block each other. So our opponent gets in for another 4 points of damage and leaves his Soldier of the Pantheon back to block. Our opponent also played his land untapped and paid 2 life, which means he's probably got a Sphinx's Revelation in hand. We still decide to attack with everyone, and our opponent traded his Soldier with ours, and here's an end of turn Sphinx's Revelation, drawing him 3 cards, but they're all lands. But here's another Sphinx's Revelation, which is gonna be a problem, as our opponent attacks once more with Blood Baron, which we are still racing with our Path of Bravery, so I'm glad we swapped it with our 3rd Spear. And we keep drawing pretty well here, as we have another Soldier of the Pantheon. Also, don't forget to gain life of Soldier of the Pantheon when your opponent plays multicolored spells. I think I did forget it a couple times here. And here we attack with everyone, but our opponent casts another Sphinx's Revelation, and he does draw another Supreme Verdict and some more creatures like Blood Baron and Attention Sphere. So he will be wiping the board and have some follow-up plays. He attacks first and gaining him some more life and putting us to 18, but another Supreme Verdict takes care of our board, and luckily Mutavault doesn't die. But on our turn we see that we draw another land, so we decide to concede. Normally you want to play out your games, but at this point it's very unlikely for us to win. Certainly after our opponent destroys our Mutavault with a Hero's Downfall. So up to game 3, where we have another pretty good opener. We have a Soldier of Pantheon, Judge's Familiar, Precinct Captain, Boros Elite and Spear of Heliod with 2 lands. Our opponent does have some early interaction, but doesn't have the Supreme Verdict like he did in the previous games. We lead with a Soldier of the Pantheon on turn 1. Our opponent has a Scry land and passes a turn. Here we decide to attack and put our opponent to 18, and after combat we decide to play out a Judge's Familiar and a Boros Elite instead of just playing Precinct Captain. This is because our Judge's Familiar can protect our creatures from removal, and this is also again good if we can play out our Spear and give all our creatures +1/+1. And we don't have the 3rd land quite yet, but we do play out Precinct Captain and attack with everyone, triggering the battalion on Boros Elite, making it a 3/3. And our opponent uses Azorius Charm on the Boros Elite, but we decide to sacrifice Judge's Familiar to counter Azorius Charm, because first of all we want to deal 3 damage, but also we want to be able to draw land, and if our Boros Elite gets put back on top, then that could take some more turns to happen, so that's why we countered it. Our opponent plays another Scry land and is representing another Azorius Charm. We draw Mutavault here, which is very nice, as we can play our Spear of Heliod. It could have been countered by Syncopate, but most Esper decks aren't running it, so we attack with everyone, activate Battalion. This time Azorius Charm finds our Precinct Captain, so we don't get the Soldier token, but we do get to attack for a lot of damage. And here our opponent doesn't really have any outs, because if he does play Jace, then we still have enough power, so we end up winning the match 2 games to 1. So I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.